Hello, y'all. Kaydub here, and in this episode of Buddhism 200, we're gonna answer some Ask a Buddhist questions. Just to put this out there right away, I'm only one person and one practicing Buddhist. You can ask 100 practicing Buddhists these same questions, and they may answer somewhat differently. They may answer somewhat similarly, but probably not identically. So keep that in mind as we answer these questions. So we're going to answer being Buddhist and ethics and maybe meditation in this episode. And then in the next episode, we'll do the Buddha in teachings. So I think we should just get right to it so that we can get these answered. Why did you become a Buddhist? So my background is my family was basically non-religious. So if we wanted to practice a religion, it was on the children to find a particular religion that they wanted to practice. And so I dabbled into a lot of world religions to see which one was sort of a closer fit. And Buddhism was a much closer fit because of the efforts of the individual being is the indicator of how far along the path the person gets. So that for someone with a very high internal locus of control, such as myself, that was very attractive, and sort of studied Theravada Buddhism a lot, and then sort of became a formal practice around 2018-19. And it's it's just a better fit than any other world religion. That doesn't mean that it's the right one. It's just the best fit for me personally. So when someone asks me, "Do you want everyone to convert to Buddhism?" No, find the religion that better suits your beliefs. Don't just conform because a religion says that it's right. Test it, analyze it, apply it. And that's another reason why I became a Buddhist. That it wasn't, well, the Buddha said this, so you need to do it. It's the Buddha said this, test it out, and then if it works out the way that it should, based upon what the texts say, then maybe you decide to practice that. So I think that's really awesome. What's the best thing about being a Buddhist? I don't have to do anything that the texts say, really, unless I apply it and it works out that way, and then I internalize it. So I think that's really awesome. There's no deity that one sins against. Any transgressions are transgressions to the living beings that are affected and oneself. The best thing about being a Buddhist is definitely having that sort of freedom, a wiggle room to try out the teachings and see if they do work out the way that the texts say they should, as opposed to just taking it as the Buddha said this, you should do it, no ifs, ands, or buts. That's not really attractive to me. I'm not a big fan of that. I would certainly never uh, tell someone that if I were a religious teacher. What's the hardest thing about being a Buddhist? There's sort of some conflict between some of the Buddhist teachings and the dominant culture here in the United States. It's still here in the United States. It's still a very materialistic sort of vibe when it comes to social and economic areas. And so when you're like, yeah, but contentment is the greatest wealth according to Dhammapada, people sort of just look at you weird. They're like, yeah, whatever. No, they don't. They don't do that. They're like, well, that's cool. Can you explain more? Usually, because the group of people that I have are actually very curious and open-minded about those things. But the hardest thing is to sort of, find a middle ground between those and say, yeah, I believe in contentment, but I do also have some goals that go beyond what I already have. And so being able to synthesize that sort of information and then create sort of that path where you're following the Buddhist path, not to the letter, but in spirit. What's the most important thing in life? Just, you know, from a Buddhist perspective, in my opinion, that would be the dukkha thing. So the dukkha thing is suffering, unsatisfactoriness, reducing that as much as possible for oneself and for others if possible. And if it is not possible to reduce another's dukkha, then don't add to it. That's sort of what I think the most important thing in life is. And generally speaking, if you're one of those type of individuals that wants to reduce others' dukkha or doesn't add to other people's dukkha, it's going to be a long, healthy friendly sort of life for the most part. Is it harder to live a Buddhist life now than in the time of the Buddha? I would argue probably yes. A lot of countries now are very highly industrialized, and so the value of a person sometimes is based upon their productivity. And that wasn't the situation really in the time of the Buddha. You could say, "Yeah, I'm tired of farming," and go into the woods and start a spiritual practice, and no one would have really given it too much thought because that was accepted at that time. If you try to do that now, there are probably some people that would call you a bum or whatever. And so I think it is harder now. There's a lot of pressure now, not to survive, but to contribute, and so it becomes very difficult sometimes to say, "Well, I'm content," and then people are like, "Well, whatever, man. You don't want the latest games? Nah, I can wait for a sale." How do you practice right livelihood? So I look at a job and I look at the job description, and sometimes I'll ask explicitly during an interview about some of these things that are concerned with right livelihood. So right livelihood is avoiding trades in meats, trades in living beings, trades in weapons, trades in poisons, and trades in intoxicants. And so I look at the job description and I look to see if there are any elements of those things in there. For example, I wouldn't be a butcher. For example, that would be a trade in meats, right? At the same time, sometimes I need to make a livelihood. I need to pay the bills or support a family if I ever decided to have one, which is not likely at this point. Um, then I would have to consider, okay, there are going to definitely be negative karmic consequences, but we have to do what we have to do in order to sustain our livelihood. So it's highly preferred that you avoid those if at all possible, but sometimes it's just not avoidable. What's it like having a new Buddhist name? When I have a new Buddhist name, I'll answer that question. You prefer your life as a Buddhist? Yes, absolutely. So life always throws curveballs, but Buddhism has been sort of like that solid foundation where it's like, okay, this is happening. What's going on here? And then, sort of look inward and be like, oh, well, this anxiety and all this. What? Okay, well, why is that there? Because of this, that, or the other. So is that craving for not having those things? Yes. Then how do we reduce that? And then it's a great process to sort of critically think about all the things that are going on so that we don't react. We respond instead based upon information. And I think that's what I would prefer. It's been very helpful and very useful. Ethics. What's your view on abortion? So for me personally, I would not get an abortion if I somehow magically became pregnant. Even if and the baby would pop out, and I'd be like, okay, adoption services, because I don't want kids. Uh, but to impose that on others, to me, is not right action. That is forcing someone to obey. I would like compliance. So I make sort of the arguments, yes, abortion is where it is legal, that's going to be an option. Let's look at the other options and see if we can get more supports so that there are reduced costs. And so we can have this baby come to term, pop out, and then we can try and find supports for that after labor is all done and over with. And try to explore those other avenues. However, if we explore all those options and the person decides I'm still going to get an abortion, I'm not stopping them. That is not my responsibility, because it says in the Dhammapada, the Buddhas point the way, right? We have to walk that path, though. Sometimes it's phrased as Buddhas merely show the way. So it is their responsibility, their karmic consequences for destroying that potentially living being, depending on the stage. So it is on them. It's a personal choice. And if it's legal, then I'm not going to stop you because it's legal. And I'm not imposing my viewpoints on you. I don't appreciate people doing that, so I don't do it to other people. So that That's my view on abortion. Are Buddhists allowed to eat meat? Yes. There is no rule against eating meat, uh, generally speaking. There may be specific sanghas that would prefer vegetarianism or veganism, which I think is the ultimate expression of compassion. But in general, if you're a practicing Buddhist, you are allowed to eat meat. Even monks are and nuns are allowed to eat meat. And there's a reason for that. It's because if a person only has meat to give, to deny them giving that freely is denying them the virtue that goes along with that gift. So that's the reason for that. Are Buddhists allowed to watch television? If you're a layperson, yes. If you are a monk or nun, consult your monastery to see what may be permissible there. It may be you're allowed to watch things that are related to the teachings, a Dharma talk, for example. So consult the monastery for that. As a Buddhist, what do you think about violent video games? Well, it's a case by case basis, in my opinion. For me, I play violent video games, but it doesn't make me more aggressive when it comes to my behavior because I'm constrained by the five precepts pretty solidly. You know, sometimes I slip up on a few of them, and you know, it's a what have you sort of situation. It is what it is. Um, but it's a case by case basis. You know, if it is making the person more aggressive, maybe we need to take that variable out of play and see if the person is just has that aggression sort of as a personality trait, or if there is an environmental influence on their aggression by reducing or eliminating the violent video games. So case by case basis is basically what I'm saying. What's your view on euthanasia? It's murder. There may be times when it is permissible because you may be reducing the other person's dukkha, but at the same time, not recommended. Uh, Especially active euthanasia where someone basically does murder them, lethal injection or whatever. Um, that's and you know there are legal options in some states now here in the United States called physician-assisted suicide, and there's an extensive sort of progression in that legislation where someone has that time where they're like, maybe I don't want to do this, and then they choose not to. Um, so, you know, it's a tricky one. For me personally, for my practice, I would not practice euthanasia. Um, so, no. What's your view on suicide? So, I work in suicide prevention. So, obviously, my view is I'm going to try and prevent suicide if at all possible. That being said, if while I'm sleeping, someone decides to complete suicide, once again, this is not on me. That person made their choice. It is their karmic consequences, not necessarily mine. And some people may be like, well, that's convenient. Well, that's sort of what the literature says, and that's how I've internalized it. But in general, I would really try and prevent that. And suicide prevention is not just, you know, crisis intervention. It is looking at the root causes of suicidal thoughts and exploring how we can reduce those influences, even if it is public policy that no one wants to pay for, except for maybe me. I don't mind having extra taxes if it means possibly saving lives, but at the same time, you know, it's more complex than the question actually is. What's your view on poverty and wealth? I hardly ever think about poverty or wealth. I have definitely worked with people that are in poverty, and for some, it is a very steep uphill battle to get out of poverty. It's not impossible, but I can understand why people give up. As for wealth, I would ask the question: do you really need three boats? Do you really need three houses? Um, it's a question of need, not wants. Are we using that wealth wisely, I guess is a sort of question. And so are we using it to improve our the social circumstances? Maybe not necessarily the wealthy person, but those that are not so well off. Or is that person self-indulging, which is the other sort of extreme? Or is it somewhere in the middle? So that's a very good question. Now, if some people who are wealthy will actually donate, and there may be some ulterior motives for tax breaks in there. We don't really know. You'd have to ask them, and they could lie about it. But when it comes to poverty and wealth, I really don't give it much thought. But I do think, for the most part, poverty is very much systemic, and so we have to look at those causes, and we have to try and influence those causes if at all possible, without making the wealthy super pissed off because they're so attached to their wealth. Um, I hate to put it bluntly like that, but that's what it is. Are Buddhists allowed to have sex? Yes. If you're a layperson, you are. If you are a monk or nun, no. Are Buddhists allowed to get married? If you are a layperson, yes. If you are a monk or nun, consult your monastery, because there are some Buddhist monasteries now that are allowing monks and nuns to be married. So please consult the rules of your monastery on that. The more conservative Theravada sort of viewpoint is no, because that's not going to lead to the elimination of dukkha. Is it okay to have sex without getting married? If there's consent, I would say yes, absolutely. If there's not consent, then that gets really complex, where it could be sexual assault or rape. That I say that it's fine. It's not something that I personally would practice. But when I think about a relationship, I'm not thinking about sex. I'm thinking about the other stuff that goes along with the relationship more than the sexual aspect. Is it okay for Buddhists to have same-sex relationships? Yes, absolutely. It's the sexual practices of same-sex relationships, or transgender individual with another individual. The sexual intercourse practices are what sort of come, no pun intended, that sort of come into play when it comes to clashes with social and cultural sort of attitudes. I don't think it's necessarily a Buddhism attitude. I think it's more of a social and cultural sort of clash. We're gonna do meditation, and then we're gonna end this episode. How often do you meditate? For how long and why? I might meditate once or twice a week for 10 to 15 minutes each session, and predominantly it's to calm everything down and refocus, sort of like a restart of the brain. Why do you meditate? To restart the brain. Sometimes I'll do analytic meditation if something's really bothering me, and sort of calm everything down when it comes to that. What do you see when you meditate? I don't usually do visualization meditation, but sometimes I will. A calm pond, or a lake, or or Niagara Falls. I'll sometimes visualize that in meditation, but for the most part, I'm focused on the breath, whether it's in through the nostrils and out through the nostrils. Breathe in, and then diaphragm comes up and down. That's sort of what I focus on more. So I don't do a lot of visualization. All right, so that's it for this particular part. In the next part, we will answer the remaining questions of Ask a Buddhist. All right, everyone. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Talk to you soon. Adios. Kaydub here. Just a friendly reminder that this content is partially sponsored by a trio. Logo's up there. A trio is an organization that allows content creators to find sponsorship opportunities on their website. So if you do end up going on their website and you do decide to register, please put in the code KAYDUB4, which is KAYDU4, and that referral will put $5 toward my channel. I appreciate your support on that. In addition, did you like the content? Go ahead and hit the like button. And if you want to get notifications for future uploads, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye, everyone, for now.